Welcome to Denver's Capitol Hill. This vibrant and eclectic neighborhood is a consortium of fascinating historical locations, beautiful residential areas, bars and music venues, and plenty of restaurants. From the concert halls of Colfax Avenue to the scenic views at Cheesman Park, there's a lot to do and see in Cap Hill for both tourists and locals alike. But there are a few aspects to this bustling urban community that a lot of people aren't aware of.
This whole area right through here is an extremely old and haunted location.
Dennis Huff is an owner and guide at Capitol Hill Ghost Tours, a company that will take you on a chilling walk through some of Denver's spookiest buildings.
Well, Capitol Hill is built on what's called ley lines, and they're magnetic lines that run under the streets in the city, basically. And ley lines are like videotapes, and they run over and over again. It's kind of what you have to think of VCR. And they will replay a lot of stone recordings, we call them, of activity that's happened in the past that isn't real today.
The stunning Croke-Patterson Mansion is a Denver landmark. Its rare chateau-style architecture, fireplaces, chandeliers, and ornate woodwork make this mansion a beautiful structure to behold. But according to Dennis Huff, there's a lot more in this house than meets the eye.
This house was built and completed in 1890. The first owner's name was Croke. He had it built. It took a little over a year and a half to complete. When they went to get him and they brought him back for his walkthrough inspection of the property, he went through the carriage house first. He came over here, went through the basement, went upstairs to the third floor, worked his way down. When he completed, he walked out the front door, walked past the builder and said, "Sell it." He never spent one day in this house. Something frightened him so badly. In fact, he wouldn't drive by the home. About a year later, during that time, he became part of the Colorado Senate, and he met Senator Patterson. Mr. Patterson brought his wife over and they looked at it and they wanted to have a very large family. Mrs. Patterson was pregnant and she was very excited and she said, "I love it, let's buy it and move in," and they did so. Lived here, she had the baby. Unfortunately, the baby passed away shortly after birth. So the story goes that the baby was taken up to City Cemetery, which is now Cheesman Park, and the baby was buried. And a couple of days after that, they contacted Senator Patterson and said, "The baby is no longer in the grave. We don't know what's happened to it." And he couldn't come home and tell his wife, who was still very distraught over the death. Finally, one day, in a very short period after that, she came to him and she said, I went up to the cemetery, I dug up the baby, and I brought her home. And she buried her in the basement of this house. Another holding company got a hold of it. They decided to turn the building into a law office. Every time they would try and run the cables through the floors, or they would take down any walls to add partitions for, like the glass walls you see in the hallway, they would come back the next day and all of the work they'd done the previous day was undone. So they thought they had vandals in the home. And so they went out and they got 2 Doberman Pinscher dogs and they put them in the house. They said, nobody's gonna mess with 2 Doberman Pinschers. Came back to work the next day, they found both dogs had jumped out of the 3rd floor turret window and were dead on the front lawn. The caretaker for this property, his name was Willie. He lived in the carriage house. He was summoned by the city of Denver to move all of the graves and all the headstones out of City Cemetery when they converted it over to Cheesman Park. What they found is that, number one, Willie and his crew were robbing graves at the City Cemetery, and they were moving the headstones, but they weren't moving the bodies. What they finally discovered in a very quick amount of time was that Willie was a practicing satanic worshiper. And what he was doing with the bodies that he brought back from City Cemetery, he wasn't removing them from the premises next door. He was doing his practice on them, then he would move the bodies. Shortly after that, he was caught trying to perform satanic worships on children and animals, and he was hung in the street.
These are just a few of the creepy tales you'll hear on one of Dennis Huff's Capitol Hill Ghost Tours. So while you're enjoying one of Denver's most unique neighborhoods, make sure you pay a visit to the famous Croke-Patterson Mansion. If you can handle it.